Hello, this is Lisa with Unexplained Arkansas, and thank you for joining me. This is episode 82, The Murder of Nona Dirksmeyer. And this is part one of a two-parter, so just FYI. A little business. If you wish to connect with me, please email me or reach out on like Facebook Messenger or whatever, but it's unexplainedarkansas@gmail.com. You can drop me a hi, a bye, a whatever if you have anything you want to say. And just like I said, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We are on all the listening platforms. And again, I'm still working on setting up the website for Unexplained America. And that will be, once the website is up, I will completely switch over name-wise, although everything is staying the same as far as platforms and our episodes. You will get to see all of that. Nothing is changing but the last part of the name. So that is being worked on. I'm really excited. Really hope to roll that out I'm thinking by the end of April or 1st of May. And just stay tuned for, in-person events. I will be posting. I do have an event in May that I will be at, and I will be the speaker. And so I will get that information out to you as soon as possible. And then also, I do have the RCast. You will be able to vote like you did last year on the RCast Awards. Me and Amber were both so very excited to win 2 awards last year. And so we will be posting, or I will be posting that. And so, yeah, so super excited about all of that. So we're going to get started. And sorry, I'm still congested. I've been congested since I had the flu. I don't know if it's just lingering or allergies or whatever, but bear with me. So maybe coughing or drinking or sniffing. So yeah, bear with me. But just FYI, so this is a very sad case today. There is mention, it's not a deep mention by any means, but just a kind of brief mention of child sexual abuse and also just, abuse. I mean, this was a very terrible murder situation for Nona. So just FYI, heads up on that. So on the evening of December 15th, 2005, Nona Dirksmeyer is found horribly beaten in her apartment in Russellville, Arkansas. There will be a total of 3 trials related to her death and 0 convictions in the years to follow. So we're going to, of course, dive in, and I like to go to the beginning. So we're gonna start at the beginning. So Nona is Nona Carol Dirksmeyer. She was born December 26th. She was a Christmas baby, pretty much, of 1985 in Zachary, Louisiana. I did listen to one podcast on this, like even before I did the research on this case, and they said Zachary, Arkansas, and then they mentioned the parish of Zachary, and I'm like, oh goodness. So anyway, my husband's from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It just, of course, Louisiana has parishes instead of counties. And so anyway, that just, for some reason, that bothered me. It's like, it wasn't Zachary, Arkansas, but she was born in Louisiana. And her parents were Paul and Carol Dirksmeyer. And Paul was actually a professor at LSU, and that is Louisiana State University. That is located in Baton Rouge, which is the capital of Louisiana. And Carol was actually 25 years younger than Paul. It said that Carol was his student. So she was a student. Paul was he's a professor in the music department, and evidently Carol was like a master, like she was pursuing her master's music. And so I guess they met. I guess Paul had been divorced and he met Carol, and then they married. So Paul, obviously, I mean, he's 25 years Carol's senior. So he got married possibly, I believe, before Carol was even born. And he had 3 boys and 1 daughter before he married Carol. And then it appears like him and Carol had 1 son and then Nona. So Nona was the baby. I mean, her siblings were literally 20 years older than her. So she was definitely the baby of the family. So Nona was named after her paternal grandmother. It's such a great name. So there was a Nona Dirksmeyer that was Paul's mom, and then Nona. And then, of course, her middle name came from her mother. So her parents, again, were both obviously very musically inclined. And, her father was the professor in the music department, and her mother was a music, studying for her master's and in the master's program at LSU. And evidently her mom, Carol, played the clarinet. And Nona would definitely follow in their musical footsteps. This was evidently just something in her. And it looked like, just from a little research, that Paul's other son, like known as, half brothers and such, they all kind of look like they had musical inclinations, like they had talent, musical talent, played instruments and such. So although Nona was born in Louisiana, it appears her dad retired kind of there quickly. Again, he's older, so he retired from LSU, and then her parents actually settled in Dover, Arkansas. And little side note, if you're a listener and you've listened for a long time, so Dover was the place of the Christmas Killer episode. So we're talking a horrendous murder spree, conducted by Ronald Gene Simmons in 1987. And that episode is number 67. So this is the same place. I mean, and Dover, it's a small city. I mean, it's 1,300 people. So yeah, so Nona, and her family, they settled there. It's not clear why they settled in Dover or why Dover was chosen, as their place. And Dover is located in the northwest portion of Arkansas. It is very close to a much larger town, which really would be its Spacetown, and where we're going to be a lot of the time in this case, but the town of Russellville, which Russellville is home to the university, Arkansas Tech University. And this is a public, 4-year college. I believe you can get, more than just your bachelor's there. So I'm thinking perhaps this was the draw for Paul and Carol. I don't know if there was family there, but definitely it had a university. So I don't know if Paul was thinking he could, continue to be a professor or whatever, maybe just do adjunct or whatever. So, and I will say, even though Carol obviously had, a lot of education in music, her actual career appears to be as an RN. So she was a registered nurse and worked as such. So it said that Nona was, a vibrant child. She had a lovely smile. If you see pictures of her, she has like a little adorable face. Like, she's very cute, and she has this very prominent dimple on one side, and she's just very, very pretty girl, very vibrant. She was extremely active in her church growing up. She loved to sing. She was bubbly. She was fun. People would say she, not only did she like to smile, she had a very hearty laugh. Like, she was just fun. She seemed very happy. She was kind, smart, and like I said, musically inclined. It was said that she had a beautiful soprano voice. So when Nona was just 10 years old, her father, Paul, does pass away. And he was 76 at the time that he passed away. And I'm sure this was extremely hard for her family. However, Nona had been carrying around a horrific secret. This was not out and about. This was not known. So she had been sexually molested by Paul. And it's not clear for how long that went on, like how much of her childhood, because she was about 10 when he passed away. But Nona didn't tell anybody. She did, yes, eventually, she did tell her best friend Chelsea. And then Chelsea would tell her own mother, Margie. And later on, I don't know if it was like when the girls were teenagers or whatever, but Chelsea had kind of clued Margie in because, Chelsea found out that Nona was cutting herself. So she was and cutting in places where maybe her mother wouldn't notice, but Chelsea found out. Margie made Nona tell her about it. Nona tells her, and then they finally go to Carol. And Carol does what any good, loving mother would do. She does get Nona into therapy. She does get her on medications to help, because clearly, obviously, there's this cutting. I don't know if it's related to her childhood drama. It probably would have been clear, but maybe by the time she was in ninth grade, this was going on. So at this time, it would have been her secret about Paul would have been out and about. This poor child. So I just can't even imagine just how horrible that is. And it's sickening and it's awful. I mean, this is her father, her own biological father. So there's just a lot to unpack there. And I know a lot of, there's just a lot of, unfortunately, instances and so many children that are in this same boat. And it does say statistically there are a staggering number of people that have been sexually abused that do kind of turn to self-harm, just kind of as a, just a way to deal with their pain. So a good thing is Nona did have a very loving mother in Carol, and Carol did get her help. So, eventually, obviously, she hid things from her, but did turn to her. So even though Nona was so very pretty, she was talented, she was smart, people liked her, it said that she did struggle with self-esteem. Probably a lot of teenage girls struggle with, I think so, but she was struggling in, high school, not to say that it was because of her childhood drama or just being a teenage girl and just all the things in the world that can make you feel, less than your best. So she did have a boyfriend. So she had a boyfriend named Kevin who had known her since she was in kindergarten. They'd grown up there in Dover. She had known him most of her life, and she literally dated Kevin for 5 years before her death. And she, he had mentioned that she did struggle with some confidence issues. However, in high school, Nona had a friend who was very active in the pageant circles, and her friend introduced Nona to pageants and these competitions. So I myself did not do pageants, did not get into that. I had a very narrow-minded view of that kind of thing when in my younger years. Now, fast forward to, I had Elle. Elle gets into dance at the age of 4. So she becomes starts dancing at 4. She becomes a competitive dancer by the time she's 6. And this is her thing. She's got a natural ability, and I'm a dance mom. So I become a dance mom. And I do have friends at church that brought me on as a board member for several years of the Miss Central Arkansas Scholarship Competition, which was a qualifier for the Miss Arkansas. So I do have some background in that, and I understand how that all works. So this is just a little side note, but I will say these women and girls that do the pageants, it can be it's just such an amazing experience for them. But so long story short, and it is for Nona. So Nona begins to get involved with pageants, and per Kevin and other, friends, she flourishes. So on that stage, she just comes alive. She exudes confidence and grace, and she just really thrives. Like it really just fits her, and she enjoys it. And it appears that she began doing this around her sophomore or junior year in high school. So kind of in her high school days. And she was crowned Pope County Fair Queen. And then she won the title of Miss Teen Mount Nebo. So Pope County is the county where she lives. So Dover and Russellville are in Pope County. In fact, Russellville is the county seat for Pope County. And then Mount Nebo, it's literally like a mountain, but it's a state park. So there's like Mount Nebo State Park. And this is very close to where she lives in Russellville. Like this whole area is connected. So this was an actual just pageant competition that she entered, and she won. So additionally, while she was in high school, so Nona was a member of the concert choir, and the chamber choir. And additionally, she sang with her church choir. So she was very, very involved in choir. Like that was her thing. And then she was doing the pageants. And of course, so pageants, they do have a talent segment. So you do have to have a talent. People, they dance, they sing, they whatever your talent is, play their instrument. So of course her talent and what she was judged on was her voice. Like she would sing for her talent portion of the pageants, and she did it beautifully. That was her thing, and it was the perfect fit into these pageants too, because anyway, Nona does graduate Dover High School in 2004, and then she went on to pursue music education at Arkansas Tech University. Now, and she would have started there in the fall of 2004. Now, Nona had her own apartment, and honestly, in the back of my head, Nona was only 19 at the time of her passing, but Nona had actually been living in the apartment since she was 18, pretty much since the time she graduated. And not that having an apartment is abnormal, for kids to do, but she did move in, to this apartment when she was 18, right after graduating high school. So, and kind of the reason, the push here was Nona's mother, of course, she had lost her husband in around 1996. So when Nona was in high school, probably around 2002 or so, her mother started dating a man, and then her mom married this man in 2004. So in fact, she married him in April 2004, and Nona would have graduated probably like right after this, okay? Just right after it. So his name is Dwayne Diaper. He will come up in this, but Dwayne had a lot of house rules, which, as you can imagine, did not sit great with 18-year-old Nona. So first of all, he did not allow dogs in the house, and Nona had 2 beloved dachshunds, so she had dogs in the house. She had always had dogs in the house. Number 2, he also did not allow cats inside the house. Like, he allowed cats, but not inside. So she had 2 cats. Like, she had her animals. Like, and she had always had her animals. And I'm sorry, when you've had animals and you've always had animals, like, that's kind of a thing. I can attest to that. So, number 3, which was probably the biggest deal I can imagine as an 18-year-old person, but he also imposed a 9 p.m. curfew on Nona. 9. I mean, to an 18-year-old, she had to be at home by 9. In fact, he made a statement in interviews that the doors would be locked to the house at 10 p.m. So if you weren't home, you were done. Like, you weren't getting in. So and these were non-negotiable rules for Dwayne. And these were rules that, Nona's mom, Carol, said okay to. So obviously, Nona was not interested in living under the same roof with Dwayne and his rules. So with the help of Carol financially and just kind of the normal things that, parents would do, especially when their child moves out, especially with that circumstances, it had been Carol and Nona on their own, living in Dover in her childhood home for years. And then all of a sudden, she does marry Dwayne. They do sell that house in Dover. Her childhood home is sold. And then Carol moves into Dwayne's home in Russellville. So this all would have been, and Nona again was a senior when this is happening, a senior in high school. So yeah. So anyway, they do get Nona set up, like Carol sets Nona up in what's called the Englewood Apartments in Russellville, Unit 12 is where she lived. And they kind of look like townhomes. And evidently, these apartments were very close to where, like, Dwayne and Carol lived. So it wasn't very far. It was just right down the road, but she would have her own place. And kind of another thing that Dwayne had said is evidently, Nona was a slob. She, that will come up. She was messy. So that was another factor. Like, evidently, he didn't even like to go to her apartment. Like, Nona would come over there. They would feed her. They would, make her dinner and whatever. And they would stop by her apartment, and he wouldn't even go in. Like, he couldn't deal with the mess. So, so yeah, so she's in her apartment and right down the road. And again, I think there's about, Kevin, the boyfriend, and all of her friends are in Dover. She's in Russellville, but she's actually, Russellville, that would have been very convenient for her to have this apartment because her school is there, Arkansas Tech University, where she's going to school. So, and there's about just 14 minutes, miles between Russellville and Dover. So it's not a huge commute. Now, Russellville is, again, the county seat. It is a much larger town. In fact, it is the largest city in Polk County. And the population as of today is around 29,000. So it's a little bit bigger than even Searcy. It has a college. It has a lot to offer. The town of Russellville has a lot to offer. So anyway, bigger town. Now, sure, all of this change was really, like I said, hard on an 18-year-old Nona. But obviously it was manageable. It was doable. They were doing it. And again, living in Russellville, having your own apartment would have had perks for her. And she'd be on her own and in the same city as where she was going to college. So again, maybe not a horrible situation at all. So now we mentioned Nona had a boyfriend. Of course, we had mentioned Kevin. So his name is Kevin Jones. Him and Nona had dated from the time that she was about 14 to the time of her death. They were very together. Their families were very together. They really thought, and their families thought, that they would get married one day. That was their plan. They weren't engaged or anything. They were very young and such, but that was their plan. They talked about it. There was a time when Nona ended up it was about 2003. So Nona was like a sophomore, junior. So Kevin did break up with Nona, and he broke up with her to date a different girl. That's devastating for a teenage girl. And they broke up for about 4 weeks total. I mean, this was a very short time, but in teenage years, I'm sure at the time it felt horrendous. But her family would recall that she was absolutely devastated. So, I mean, Kevin wasn't only her boyfriend, but he was her best friend. And evidently she wouldn't eat, she wouldn't sleep, she was heartbroken. I think she had made comments, even, I don't know how serious or how seriously they were taken, but that she didn't, that she would just, kill herself if he didn't take her back or whatever. She was devastated. She was 16 or 17 at this time, and this was horrible. So Kevin, he went off to try to, get with another girl. I'm sure he found out like you do, the grass isn't greener. So literally within the month, Kevin is realizing he's still in love with Nona. He wants Nona back, and he begs Nona back. And of course, Nona loves him. She takes him back. She forgives him. She takes him back. But of course, you know how it goes with breakups. Typically, the family and friends are less like enthused. All they saw was the heartache, what he did to her. It took a little bit to get, the trust was broken. Carol was, I'm sure at that time, like not a Kevin fan, like you broke my daughter's heart, how that goes. And so they were less enthused when they got back together. I mean, this is her baby girl. The kids, they get back together though. They stay together. They, graduate high school together. They talk about marriage. They talk about kids. Both of them decided, they wanted to wait until they graduated college before they got married. And Kevin, wanted to be financially good. He wanted to really do it right when he did propose to Nona. He wanted to make sure that she had a beautiful ring and that things were ready. So, of course, Nona's going to Arkansas Tech University in Russellville. Well, Kevin, so he decides to go to college at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. And I will say this is to my knowledge, the one and only Division I school in our state. This is home to the Razorbacks. And Fayetteville is a good hour and 45 minutes from Russellville. Far away, but it's far enough. And so obviously Kevin and Nona were engaging in a long distance relationship. But according to Kevin, they were very committed. I mean, they would have seen each other when they could on weekends. And of course, holidays and whatever. An hour and 45 minutes is not, horribly far. Now, let's fast forward. So, in 2005, Nona was crowned Miss Petit Jean Valley. And so this pageant, just like what we kind of talked about, so it was a qualifier for the Miss Arkansas pageant. So this title put her to where she would be able to compete in the Miss Arkansas pageant. So, and to kind of get into this a little bit, when you're involved in pageants, there's a lot of paper. I will say there's a lot of paperwork. In these pageants, you are winning scholarship money. You are winning money to use for your college. So there is a lot of paperwork. There are a lot of standards. And so one of the requirements is to have like a platform, have a charity where you are volunteering your time and efforts. And I don't want to downplay any of Nona's good works that have been, written about her, but this is just the way it is. You do have to have these volunteer times. You do have to speak and be educated about your platform, that, something that you're passionate about. And so you do, of course, get to choose, whatever platform or whatever charity you want. It can be any type of, nonprofit or volunteer work, depending on your own personal experiences and connections. Some people, I met a lot of girls in pageants, and some people were about the opioid crisis, and then some, were about homeless. There's a lot of different that the people are passionate about. And for Nona, and obviously, she is a music, education student about children. So she was an advocate and spoke out against child abuse. And of course, this with her own horrific, childhood trauma would have been very personal to her, would have been something that she definitely could easily advocate, easily put her time and efforts into. The passion thing for her, and also very important, she got involved in the program, the Big Brother and Big Sisters program. And so on the evening that she was killed, she was actually supposed to be meeting one of her little sisters. And honestly, just to kind of give you a little background. So Nona had actually competed that summer before she died in the Miss Arkansas pageant. And it didn't show how she did the rankings. It didn't look like, she got the top 10 or top, I don't know if she made it to the top 25 or whatever, but typically there are 40 to 50 contestants involved in the Miss Arkansas. And that had happened back in June. And so the fact that she was still volunteering her time with the Big Brothers and Little Sisters program that she was involved in says a lot to me. It says that it was more than just something that she, quote unquote, had to do for her pageant work, if that makes sense. Obviously, Nona was a very caring, and to me, a very mature 19-year-old. Due to circumstances and whatever, she was living on her own. She was volunteering her time. She was in school. She was just a very mature 19-year-old. So on December 14th, the day before her death, Nona and Kevin had actually been together. He had come home, from Fayetteville. He was home for the Christmas break, and of course, his parents live in Dover, so comes over to Nona's apartment to see her on the 14th. And then kind of their plan. So he's at home, and I will say just a little side note. So Kevin and Carol were the only two people that had keys to Nona's apartment other than Nona. Kevin knew that Nona she still had semester finals for her college the next day. So he knew that she was going to take a final on the 15th, which would have been a Thursday. And then she had the plans about her dinner plans with her little sister. He had plans with his mother for December 15th on the night of, so his dad was actually out of town. His name is Hiram, and he was working out of town down in Louisiana doing some cleanup work with this company. I think he was a logger and such. He was doing cleanup work after, Hurricane Katrina had happened. He was on town, and so his mother, Kevin's mother, Janice, had asked Kevin to be her date, so to speak, for her work Christmas party there in Russellville. She was a middle school teacher, and in fact, I think the party was actually in Darnell, it's very close to Russellville. And in fact, they live in Dover. There's Russellville. I think it was Darnell where the actual party was going on. So this is all in the close realm. So they both had plans. So just to kind of lay this out, so they saw each other the 14th, and then they knew that they were both pretty busy on the 15th. She was busy. He was busy. It did sound like they had plans to actually hang out on the 15th, okay? And that was Thursday. Kevin said that on the morning of the 15th, Nona texted him, just like she would, and she said, "Good morning, Cuddle Muffin. I love you." And Kevin, and I think she sent that about 9-ish, and so Kevin was still sleeping. So he did not respond. I guess he gets up a little bit later, 10:30, and he knew what her day was like, so he doesn't respond or try to reach out to Nona until about 11 or so. She doesn't respond, which was not unusual because, again, he knew that she was busy. As the day kind of progressed, he continued to try to get in touch with her because she was, even though she had a busy day, she was typically on top of returning, calls and texts. So, and all she did have was her cell phone. So she did have a cell phone. He wasn't alarmed, but he was just kind of like trying to reach out to her. And his day was just kind of spent running errands, doing a few things. Like, he didn't have his plans until that evening. He's kind of getting a little bit concerned because the whole day goes by and he's not heard from her. Kevin and his mom weren't due at the actual Christmas party until 6:30 p.m. Kevin, probably 5 or so, he is getting concerned. He has not heard anything from Nona. She always answers her phone. So Kevin reaches out he has like a really good friend, Ryan Whiteside, that works as a pizza delivery man in Russellville, and he delivers in the area that Nona lives in, where her apartment is. Kevin calls Ryan and was like, "Hey, do you mind to stop in at Nona's apartment while you're working? Because I can't get a hold of her. Like, I just, check it out, see if her car is there." So Ryan was like, "Sure, no problems." But around by 6 or so, Ryan makes it over to Nona's apartment, and he does notate that her car is there at the apartment, and there's a light on in the upstairs part. So her apartment is kind of like a townhome. It has like a first floor, second floor. Anyway, so Ryan calls Kevin, lets him know, and then Kevin asks Ryan to actually knock on the door. Ryan does this, nothing. So now, Kevin and Janice are en route to the party. They are alarmed and they don't understand. So instead of going to the party, they decide to go straight to Nona's. And Janice even comments later, like, she could tell that Kevin was worried. Like, this was weird. This was not normal for Nona. They drive, to Russellville. They drive to her apartment. They meet up with Ryan is there. So Kevin gets there, meets up with Ryan. So they initially go to the front door. They're pushing the doorbell and knocking, nothing. So they are trying to get through the front door. And Kevin does have a key to Nona's house, but he did not have it with him. He did not carry it around with him, evidently, all the time. So they do try to use a credit card. I don't know if you're old enough to have ever tried to use a credit card or your driver's license to get in a door, but you kind of try to slip it in like where it latches or whatever. So they try the whole credit card thing. That did not work either. So then they go around to the back of the apartment. The apartment has a sliding glass door. And usually it said that there was a broom handle stick. I mean, it's just a stick. It's, people would use a broom handle or whatever, but a stick that would be lodged like in the frame of the sliding glass door so that, people couldn't just open it. And that, if you've ever had a sliding glass door or seen a sliding glass door, again, that probably ages people, but you'll remember this stick. You had a stick. That was your security in keeping that sliding glass door, like, quote unquote, locked. This is a very late 80s, 90s situation going on. But yes, sliding glass doors have a stick. So they don't see the stick. That was weird. Luckily, they try, there are blinds. Okay, there are blinds on the store. And Ryan nudges Kevin. He's like, "Hey, I can see her. Like, I can see a body. I mean, I can see her, Nona, lying in the house. So, and Kevin's like, oh, so they are able to pry open the sliding door because that's sticky in there, remember? And so Kevin just rushes to Nona. The apartment is dark. He goes straight to her. She is naked except for socks. She is laying face down in the living room of the apartment. She is cold and stiff, and there's like a coppery scent in the apartment, like blood. And again, it's very dark. Like it's dark in there. They run over there. Kevin, rolls her over, and he gets over her and just grabs her. He's just grabbing her. He doesn't, he's not knowing what to do. At the same time, Ryan is, of course, flipping out. He doesn't know what to do, but he lets Janice in the front door. I mean, this is total chaos, and immediately they call 911. And Ryan is on the phone first, and then Janice is on the phone with the 911 operator. And I've heard it. It's frantic. They're in shock and anguish. They don't know what's going on. And Janice will comment later, she had only seen a dead, a couple times, like at a actual funeral, but these boys hadn't seen. I mean, this would have been an absolute first for all of them. So there's just a lot of shock and anguish and franticness. You could tell everybody's, just upset. So Janice is trying to be as composed as possible, and she does tell the boys not to touch anything, but they were all in shock, and Kevin does try to give CPR to Nona. He tries it, and her teeth are actually clenched shut, and he noticed there was like no breath coming from her, and she's cold and stiff, and so he is just over her. He is literally straddling her body, and he's just cuddling her, and he's crying. So the first responders show up at the apartment, and they see Kevin over her. They see him straddling over her, and blood is all over her, and now it's all over him. And they do note that she is naked except for white socks. So the Russellville Police Department, they show up. They immediately escort Janice and Ryan outside the apartment. So they get them out of the apartment. In the meantime, another officer is, talking to Kevin, asking questions. And Janice wants to go to Kevin to be there for him, comfort him. This is her child, but she's not allowed. And of course, she's devastated about just all of this. Nona is like part of their family. So a detective, Mark Frost, who is not necessarily new to law enforcement. Evidently, he did have a 10-year history of law enforcement in some capacity, but he was very new to homicide. In fact, evidently, this would be the very first homicide that he would be involved in. But he is dispatched to go to the Inglewood Apartments, Unit 12, and he is told it appears to be a murder. And so he had been out shopping, doing Christmas shopping with his wife, and so he shows up at the apartments. When he gets there, he does advise all parties to step outside the apartment. Obviously, the EMTs had filled in that clearly she is not, breathing. She's not alive, but appears to be dead, for a while. So he gets everybody outside, and there's already a crowd of people forming. And it is cold. This is a cold December night. It's said to be about 20 degrees or so, which this is pretty chilly for Arkansas. He grabs a camera from his car, and so Detective Frost begins taking photographs of the scene. So he's going through, he's photographing. He does have police chief is with him. So police chief James Bacon is there. So Bacon is in the crime scene as well. He is making notes. He notes a floor lamp with blood all over it. Nona has blood all over her face and hands. He notes that she has cuts on her neck and shoulder. Those were visible. So they're going through, they're trying to document. So they do note a bra and a pair of jeans are kind of thrown, kind of looks like away from Nona's body up against the wall. Her underwear is rolled up into jeans, so it looks like they were kind of pulled off at, in one instance, how that goes. The base of the lamp, he notated, so there was a lamp, a very heavy lamp, the living room. And so the base of the lamp is dented. And this is, again, very heavy lamp. There is blood on the blinds. They do notate, and again, they're taking pictures. So there's blood on the Venetian blinds, blood on a candle there in the living room. There appears to be a struggle in the kitchen. There was blood on the oven door. There was cat food, and Nona's flip phone were on the kitchen floor as if they had been thrown, off a counter or the table. So they were just thrown. And then the back of the phone was off and the battery was removed from the flip phone. Then they do find a torn condom wrapper, not a condom, but just the wrapper, and a steak knife laid on the kitchen counter. And then both Frost and Bacon notate the living room is a mess. They're just looking at it. There was evidently a pile of clean clothes piled up on the couch. And then when they went upstairs in the apartment, that is equally a mess. They said that there were dirty clothes, and of course they're taking their notes. Dirty clothes everywhere in the bedroom of the apartment. And then there was another room upstairs, and there was just sheet music everywhere. Just a complete mess. So basically, Detective Frost decides that this was just a messy person living here. That he didn't feel like this mess had anything to do with the murder per se, but he related it to just her being a messy college kid, and the place was just a mess, which is denoted from Dwayne, her actually, I'm sure people that they talked to. So they do note there's no forced entry into the apartment and nothing appeared to be stolen. The detective really decides a lot of things that night, and he pretty much decides that Nona had to have known her killer because of the no forced entry, and just he felt because of the nature of the actual, what happened to her, the nature of the scene. As Frost is working the crime scene, so Kevin is taken down to the Russellville Police Station to give his statement. And I would think this is very normal, very, very normal. And of course, he's the boyfriend. So he is left in a police interrogation room on his own for about 30 minutes. He's upset. There's video. There's, you can watch that. He's grieving. He's crying. He's upset. And he looks, at this point in 2005, this is terrible. It's not terrible. I don't know why it's terrible. He looks like Ron Weasley from the Harry Potter movies. Especially like that early, like 2005, like his hair, it's kind of like that bowl cut that was popular. He looks very much like a little boy, and he has red hair. So he really looks like Ron Weasley. Very young. He just looks very young to me now, although I would have been about their age when all this happened, a little bit older. So anyway, two detectives do eventually come in to talk to Kevin. One is Detective Verdon. He is described as, kind of the heavy, no nonsense. He's a very built, large, muscled up man, shaved head, no smile, no personality. Like, he is just very straight, like down to business. And then there was a detective, Carrie James. And I guess in that first interview, they were the two detectives to interview. They, probably kind of the bad cop, good cop situation. But they do read Kevin his rights. They ask him multiple times to give his account, of everything that he did that day. Just answer all kinds of questions for them. They do take photographs of Kevin for the file. And of course, they do this because they're looking for, marks on Kevin. They're looking at his, chest, his hands, his arms, everything. They're documenting this. They do ask him about a mark on his forehead, and Kevin doesn't even, you can tell, he has no idea what they're talking about. I guess it was just a tiny little mark on his forehead. So they do question Kevin for 2.5 hours. He is questioned for that length of time, and everything from his relationship with Nona, his alibi for the day, his just everything. Kevin details that he ran errands, he spoke to friends, he had emailed his professors at his college. He did go and speak to his grandma, went to see her. So he just let them know all about everything. And then he let them know that Nona had texted him around 9-ish in the morning and good morning. And, he said that she had finals and that he had tried to phone her later because he was trying to sleep so he didn't phone her right away. And so, again, and the detectives went over everything. He was, over and over. It was very clear. Kevin never wavered. He was upset. It was very clear that he was definitely working with the police, answering all the questions, not being, weird about that. So he didn't leave the police station until after midnight. And Janice was there with him, waiting on him. And as you can imagine, I'm sure that they were just in shock, absolute shock. And they're exhausted and they're shocked. So in the meantime, poor Nona's mother, Carol, is notified. And I'm sure that this was the most devastating day of her life. I can only imagine. I can't even imagine. It would be so horrific. So Carol is notified. I'm sure the police, got with her. So she is devastated. Nona is her, only daughter, her baby. Carol states in interviews, it was just horrible. It was the end of my world. She was in so much shock. She couldn't believe, you just can't. She couldn't believe what was happening. It didn't seem real. There was absolutely no way that this could happen. This could be happening to her Nona. She was just absolutely in shock. She couldn't wrap her mind around this. So, I have a daughter. I know she is the biggest blessing in my life. So I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine poor Carol. That's just horrendous. This one gets me. They all get me, but this one gets me. This one really gets me. Over the next couple days, Nona's family, who also, they fully incorporated Kevin into their family, into their pain, into their planning of Nona's funeral. Kevin was Nona's longtime boyfriend, going to marry her. So Kevin was involved in picking out clothes Nona would wear for the funeral, picking out the casket, just all the things, all the horrible things that have to be done, after someone passes away. And it was decided that, her visitation would be December 21st, and then her funeral would be December 22nd, which the funeral would be on Thursday, which was literally a week after her death. But it was decided at the visitation, he would stand, he would be with the family and stand with the family. And it started at 4 p.m. So that was very important, to the family, to him, to everybody that happened. So while the family worked on the funeral arrangements, of course, the Russellville Police Department is working and the medical examiner is working. So things are happening. The police is working on the case and the medical examiner is working on her body. So the medical examiner, Dr. Charles Cokes, he is the one that handled her autopsy. So he notes Nona is a white female. She is 120 pounds and 65 inches tall. So about 5'5", very, very good height. Very slender. She's a very slender person. She was, at the time he viewed the body, wearing one white sock. The white sock thing is said kind of over and over again. So I don't know if initially she's wearing both socks or always wearing one sock, or maybe one sock came off in the, just the moving of her. But by the time the body was viewed by Dr. Coke, she was wearing one white sock. She had a dozen superficial cuts to her neck and right shoulder. She had 4 shallow stab wounds. And these were, it doesn't say exactly where they were, but around her neck and shoulder area. She had rub burn on her face. She had a split lip. She had bruising to her left temple. She had no visible signs of a sexual assault. Her eyes were hemorrhaged, and her hyoid bone was broken. So, of course, this is typically indicative of choking. So, the medical examiner just felt like she was choked. So there was additionally a large cut at the base of her head with a skull fracture visible. And he noted in his notes, this was the blow, the life-ending blow for her. He noted the time that the body was found at 6:30 p.m. The body was cold, rigor had set in, and there was lividity present. And lividity is the pooling of blood in the body. So that's what they're looking at. It almost looks like bruising, but it's basically where the blood has stopped pumping, and so it's pooling depending on how she's laying. He suspects she had been deceased for 6 to 7 hours, putting the time of death between 11 and 1 p.m. He noted that she had been punched, choked. The perpetrator tried to slash her throat. The murderer hit her with a devastating blow to her head with the base of the lamp. And the entire attack would have taken about 5 minutes or so, and she would have been in complete terror this whole attack. I mean, this is devastating. This was vicious. And just, a lot. And she clearly fought, because it did take that much to get her. So she was clearly fighting for her life against this person. Oh, absolutely devastating. The investigators, in the meantime, were going through Nona's phone. So they were, you have to forensically, go through and investigate the phone. So she had been, they noted, in contact with a few young men in the weeks before her death. She had, evidently there was one, and the text the text that they could see appeared that these, men were more than friends. And one text string between one young man contained over 100 texts, and one of the texts literally said, "Why did you lead me on?" So within that first few days of Nona's death, the police had about 6 to 7, suspects to look into. By Wednesday, December 21st, so this is the day of the visitation. So on Wednesday, December 21st, Kevin and his friend Brandon, they drove up to Fayetteville to Kevin's place there to get clothes for the visitation that night. Like he hadn't been home, he had been home for the Christmas break, and then all this had happened. And so he needed to run up to Fayetteville. So while there, evidently, this is a little convoluted, but the brother of his roommate stated he saw Nona the day that she passed, on the 15th, and he thought he saw her about 1 p.m. driving her silver Mustang, and evidently she was near on the campus of Arkansas Tech. So Kevin, he felt like this was big information, and he wanted to relay it to the police. So he phones and gets Detective Frost, and Detective Frost asked him to come straight to the police station so that they could talk, about this and talk in person. So, and evidently, so Detective Frost wasn't actually assigned to the case. He was processing this scene with, Chief Bacon. But as of the 21st, because of some personnel issues at the police station, so Detective Frost is now the lead investigator. And again, this is his first time to ever work a homicide, to have it cover a homicide. So fresh, very fresh. Kevin and Brandon, they, he asked them to come. So they start speeding from Fayetteville down to Russellville, and they actually are going so fast that they get pulled over by a state trooper. And they tell the trooper, the reason why they're speeding, and the trooper calls and talks to Frost, and Frost confirms that Kevin is supposed to come straight to the police department. But Frost also tells Kevin to slow down, like, take your time. But in Kevin's mind, of course, he's in a rush. He is supposed to be at the visitation by 4 p.m. And Fayetteville is, it's almost like 2 hours drive. So in his head, he's trying to speed to get to, the police station, because he's got to talk to them. And then he also has to be at the visitation by 4. And he does tell, the detectives this, hey, the visitation's at 4. So Kevin gets to the station, and Detective Verdon from before is with Frost. So they again read Kevin his rights. Detective Frost is very cordial with Kevin, very relaxed. He's casual. I guess Detective Burden is still more the heavy, silent, bad cop, good cop thing going on. In this interview, all of this is documented. Kevin does ask if he's a suspect. He's like, am I a suspect? Like, what's going on type thing. So they kind of don't even answer. Of course, they don't even answer his question on that. And then, Detective Burden just, he again is playing bad cop, and Frost is like, well, just talk to us. We're just talking. It's all very casual. So they do discuss, Kevin's tip. Like, Detective Frost, writes down Kevin's tip about his roommate's brother. So evidently the name of the brother is Andy, and Andy was driving around with his girlfriend. And then he said that's when he saw Nona driving around 1 p.m. in her car. So, again, Frost appears to be jotting this information down, taking this information seriously, which is why Kevin thinks he's there. They begin asking Kevin again to kind of start at the very beginning. They take him back over all the questions that they had already asked him. And so he says, he's complying. He says he went to his family's gas station. Evidently, they own a gas station in Dover. And he gets there about 11 or 11:30. And his grandma is there working the counter, seeing to the store, and he visits with his grandma. And then he leaves, and he actually goes and gets lunch somewhere. And then he tells basically all of his stops, his errands. And then evidently he goes back to the gas station to relieve his grandma for a bit at around 3:15 or so. And then by then he is sending Nona texts. He's been trying to correspond, and at 4:30, by 4:30, he's tried to get Nona so many times, but he texts her a text that says, "You alive?" And of course, obviously, when you're sitting in a police station and this person, wasn't alive, this looks really bad. I think we can all honestly say we have texted someone, "You alive?" ? Like, I know I have when I don't get a response from, like my Daryl or something. I'm going to tell on Amber. She will, if she doesn't get a hold of me within a second, she will blow me up and she will text if I'm alive. So, that is something that people do, right or wrong. It's what we do, and so he had done that. So Kevin, when he initially got to the police station, again, he had made the detectives aware he was supposed to be at the visitation at 4. And they told him, no problem. This will just take, a little bit of time. Well, you can imagine how that went. So after a bit of questioning, Detective Frost asks Kevin if he's willing to take a polygraph. And Kevin responds, yes, he will do anything. He tells them, I will do anything I can to be of help. Like, absolutely anything. Detective Frost, he gets, the polygraph technician person to come in and set up. And this person's name is Bill. I didn't get their last name, but they come in, set it up, and kind of in the meantime, so it's 4. Their time has passed. Janice is at the visitation. She's worried. Kevin's not there. She's like, where is Kevin? Does anybody know where Kevin is? So Hiram, Kevin's dad, obviously he had been out of town at the time of Nona's death, but he is back. He had come home immediately. So he's there, and he's like, I don't know where Kevin is. So Kevin's friend Brandon is still at the police station. He's waiting on Kevin. And of course, Kevin allows the officers to, polygraph him, and they tell him all this stuff. The polygraph is best and most high-tech tool they have, and that the FBI utilizes it, and the CIA, and it's just a great investigative tool. And they tell him that this polygraph technician, the officer that's handling this, has done this for like 28 years experience on it. Like, this is what they're telling this 20-year-old boy, like he is 20. So after the test, they come back with the findings. They come in and tell Kevin that he has failed the polygraph. But he didn't just fail it. He miserably failed it. They tell him they've never seen someone fail it so bad as he did before in all the 28 years experience. They believe, and then they tell him, they believe that he killed Nona. And Kevin is shocked. He is shocked that he's failed the test. He's shocked that they're accusing him of the murder. It is very evident. He is shocked. So they tell Kevin, they do say, you have a right to an attorney, and he declines. He's in shock. He's a kid. In his mind, you only need an attorney if you're guilty. And in his mind, he's not guilty. So he doesn't make them stop the conversation, or he doesn't mention an attorney. Like, he stays. So he's thinking in his mind he will convince them of his innocence. Like, he's going to talk his way out of this. So the interrogation continues, and of course the detectives are hammering him. They're hammering him hard. You've got, Frost is going at him. Frost is going on and on about, how it's his job to process the crime scene and how good he is at his job. And then you have even Chief Bacon coming in, and he's kind of trying it from a father figure angle, like, Kevin, you just messed up. You're not a bad kid. Just they're trying every which way to get a confession out of Kevin, and Kevin just keeps denying it. I mean, he just keeps, denying his involvement. He says he's innocent. Like, they tell Kevin that they are going to let Nona's family know he did it, that they're going to hold a press conference to let the city know there's one suspect and it's him. Like, they're telling him all this, and they tell him then that they have his bloody palm print on the light bulb of the lamp that killed Nona. And Kevin is horrified. You clearly see he's horrified. He is confused. He doesn't understand. I mean, he just thinks, I'm innocent. I've got to convince them of my innocence. Like, there's no way he's just in shock. There's no way this is happening. And they then tell him, that his motive in this whole thing was that he had come over to Nona's apartment that morning. He had found, the condom, and that he, in a rage, killed her. And again, all Kevin is like, I don't know these men. I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't know she was talking to anyone. Like, he doesn't know. He just still doesn't ask for an attorney, doesn't understand. And he doesn't know that he can walk out of there. He doesn't understand. So in the meantime, the visitation came and went. The Jones family, they don't understand what's going on. They don't know where Kevin is, what's going on. They do find out from friends he's at the police station. They're completely alarmed, what is going on. So Hiram and Kevin's brother, Russell, they go down to the police station, and they're just asking to see Kevin. They're like, my kid's here. Like, we want to see him. We want to get him out of there. And they're just told to take a seat. So they're just sitting in the police station waiting. Of course, they're not going to let him in the room or whatever. So Janice goes home after the visitation. She goes home. She's waiting. She's fretting. Of course, she's just worried. She's a mother. After a bit, around 10 p.m., Janice actually gets a call from Carol, Nona's mom, saying that Kevin is at the police station and that an attorney that Carol knew from church told her to tell the Jones to get Kevin out of there. Like, get him an attorney and get him out of there. And so Janice is beside herself. Like, she's like, an attorney? Like, what? Like, this is a very foreign idea. Like, why do we need an attorney? These people do not, they have never encountered such a situation in their whole life. They don't know what to do. I mean, all Janice knows is that she wants to help her son, and she just has no idea what to do. So Russell also calls Janice to let her know that Hiram and him were there at the police station. Hiram is upset and wants her down at the police station also. Like, come on, So Janice connects, she's just told to get an attorney. So she connects to one of her family members who is actually an attorney. She has a niece that's an attorney. And so the niece instructs Janice to go to the police station and bang on the door where Kevin is and yell as loudly as possible so that Kevin can hear her that he needs to ask to leave. He's free to go. He's not arrested. He can walk out, like, simply walk out. Because he doesn't know this. They don't know this. Janice doesn't know this. Hiram does not. I mean, they do not know how this all works. So Janice goes to the police station. She meets up with Hiram and Russell, and Brandon's still there. So she fills them in on what she's been instructed to do by her niece. They are kind of walking around. They're trying to figure out, in this building where, Kevin is. So Brandon does hear voices, and so he indicates the room where Kevin is to them. So Hiram, I mean, bless him, he's a dad. This is his son. He wants break-in. He wants his son out of that room. He picks up a chair and throws it against the wall. And in his mind, he's just wanting to get their attention. He's just wanting to cause noise. He doesn't realize, though, that the wall that he's thrown this chair into is just sheetrock. And that chair goes straight through the wall. Like, straight through the wall. So you can imagine how that goes. The detectives come out. They get other men, other police officers, and they arrest Hiram and they take him out and take him to the county jail. So Hiram is removed, I'm laughing because I cannot even imagine poor Janice and poor Kevin and poor Hiram and Brandon. Like, they're like, oh my gosh, like, oh, like, what do we do? So now Hiram's in jail. And after this commotion, Janice, all she knows is that she still needs to get Kevin out of there. So she does as instructed. She beats on the door while yelling for Kevin to walk out over and over until a police officer comes out and removes her from the building. So now Hiram's in jail. She's outside the building, and all of the Jones family and friends have already started to gather at the police station. So they're all there. They're kind of in support. And of course, Janice is beside herself. So they begin to pray. They begin to circle up and they pray, and kind of lo and behold, God provides, and within a couple minutes, Kevin comes out. So the family then, of course, they have to go get Hiram out of the county jail. So he is charged with a $500 fine, and he's charged with malicious mischief. Police, like they said, immediately, they had told Kevin, hey, we're going to tell Nona's family that you did it, and we're going to hold a press conference the next day. So immediately they call Carol, and they tell her that they want to come see her. So this is very late. This was probably like 11 or 12 o'clock that night, maybe later. And they tell Carol Kevin did it. They tell her about the palm print, the blade palm print. And they tell her that Kevin is a sociopath with a narcissistic personality. And they tell them that the motive is that Kevin would have found out about the men that Nona was talking to, that he finds the condom wrapper in her kitchen, and he just blows up and he stages the crime scene and then uses his mom and friend later on that day to make him look innocent, and that, he could just show up and get blood all over him and contaminate, the crime scene. And Carol, she had, she's the one that had called Janice that night and told Janice, what her attorney friend had said. So this is just like, hey, the police are telling me this. It must be true. It must be true. And of course, Dwayne is like, oh yeah, it must be the boyfriend. So Dwayne, the stepdad, oh yeah, he jumps on that real quick. And I have to say, as Carol, what else would you believe? Like, what would, and of course, so this is small town USA. So you can imagine, Carol knows, Dwayne knows, they're telling their family, they're telling their friends. Yeah, so this gets around pretty quickly. And just like the police say, they're going to hold a press conference the next day right before Nona's funeral. So at 9 o'clock the next morning on December 22nd, the police hold their press conference. It's Chief Bacon, Detective Frost is there, the prosecutor for Polk County, David Robbins, he's there. And they announced that they had interviewed more than 50 people in the last week, and that they were close to an arrest, and they had narrowed down to just one suspect. And they never said Kevin's name, but obviously, they told the family told by this next day, it was pretty out there. So Nona's funeral began at 10 a.m. There's just talk. Everything's buzzing. It's, people are on high alert. They're looking at Kevin. Kevin is completely under suspicion. They had told him that he couldn't sit with them at the funeral. Naturally, they're like, please, no. So people are watching. People are watching Kevin's every single move, and they're noticing that he's not sitting with Nona's family. Him and his family are apart. This is absolutely, I'm sure, horrible feeling for Nona's family, and of course the Jones family. It's just across the board horrible. And I really can't blame, Carol and her family for their feelings. What else are they supposed to believe? The police are telling them these facts, and they think they're the police. They should know. They investigated this. They've talked to all these people. Like, they should know. The days after the funeral really wouldn't get easier for either family. Of course, the Jones, they go on, and even though, Kevin isn't arrested, the police had said that he would be. So they go ahead, they do find out that the best criminal defense attorney in the state is a man named Kenny Johnson, and he actually lives in Monticello. Monticello is over 2 hours, about almost 2.5 hours to the southeast of Russellville. So we'll drive. And Hiram and Kevin on Christmas Eve, literally on Christmas Eve, they drive to meet Kenny and kind of go ahead and procure him as an attorney for him. And Kenny does, they meet with Kenny. They're very impressed by Kenny and how, steady and reassuring he was. And also Kenny was impressed with them. Like, he was impressed with their sincerity. He felt like Kevin was telling him the truth. Like, he was just all around, it was a good fit. So what was shocking for the Jones is the cost of a very good attorney. So the Jones, it's hundreds and thousands of dollars, basically. The Jones family would have to pull all their resources. We're talking the whole family's resources. They did have, of course, they had some family money. Grandma had money. They have a family farm. They are basically pulling funds. This is hundreds of thousands of dollars. No, they're pulling money from everywhere, and they're doing it to save Kevin. They've got to do this. There's no other way. So meanwhile, in Dover, Russellville, people, their talk, I can only imagine. Everything I do here in Searcy, I think, is known. Likewise with everybody else. We all know each other's business. But, Russellville, Dover, these are small towns that, people talk. And people are choosing sides. So the word is out. The word is, I believe the first things people were thinking when it first happened was that, rumors get started, and evidently Nona had done it to herself, which is insane. How rumors start. Now everybody was on the bandwagon. Kevin did it. It has to be the boyfriend. So lines are drawn. It's just a waiting game. The police said that they were an arrest was imminent. An arrest actually doesn't take place until March 31st of 2006. So this happens December 15th, and the police announced that they arrested Kevin March 31st. However, already in the court of public opinions, according to Hiram, Kevin's dad, Kevin had already been tried, convicted, and sentenced all within 90 days of Nona's death. Like, that's how the family felt. And Kevin would be released on a $250,000 bond. So, arrested, he's arraigned, he does bond out. And so now, they have to work on his case. Kevin's attorney, Kenny, he needs to get to work, but he tells the family, this is going to be very involved. I need help. So he tells the family he needs assistance and work in the case. They're basically going to have to investigate this thing to prove innocence. So specifically, since the Russellville Police Department really didn't investigate anything too deeply. According to Kenny, they had tunnel vision. Their investigation went straight for Kevin. So it was a problem. So he gets 2 other attorneys to help him. And it's Mike Robbins is one of them. And Mike has a very good friend named Dr. Todd Steffi. And Steffi, he lives in the Dover area. He is a pastor. He also works as a part-time, investigator for Dover. He is a very insightful, intelligent, investigator. And so Mike really feels like they need him. They need his help in investigating this. Steffi, he had been in law enforcement many years on top of course, his, other careers, but he had started out in law enforcement as a former police chaplain. So he just had a lot of experience under his belt. We're in April 2006, and they are all looking over this case and the investigation done by the Russellville Police Department, or in their opinion, lack thereof. And they note, firstly, of course, the polygraph is merely a tool. It's not really like a high-tech tool like they told Kevin, but, they know that it's more of an extraction tool. They even discuss that and utilize it just to possibly get a confession, which they didn't get out of Kevin. So they look at that, and they look at the prosecutor's whole case was surrounding the fact that there was no visible force entry, and that the bloody palm print on the light bulb matched Kevin. And so the defense did note that the police, in their notes regarding the light bulb, mentioned the blood on the light bulb appeared to be tacky. This word would be very important in this whole case. Tacky, meaning not dry. The defense also note the police never tested any of the blood for DNA. They also never conducted testing regarding the blood on the bulb. They never, tried to extract DNA. And they also never conducted tests to look into why it would be tacky. Like, they never did blood tests, just on the bulbs. A lot of things they felt like they could do. A lot of, investigating that the defense could do. So Todd asked another important question. Was the condom wrapper ever analyzed for DNA? And what they found out from the police, when they reached out about that, so the police had, sent the condom wrapper to the Arkansas State Crime Lab. And the crime lab had told them that the crime lab could only, so you had to pick one, they could either test the condom wrapper for prints or DNA, but they could not do both. So they did test for prints, which they did not find any prints on the condom wrapper. But Todd knew that this was not correct, that they could definitely still test the condom wrapper for DNA. He advised Kevin's attorneys to get the condom wrapper, tested for DNA. So they did find a lab in Florida that had a much more sophisticated testing ability than the crime lab in Arkansas. Lo and behold, it took a lot of time, and this is April, and they started investigating April 2006. So by December of 2006, the lab in Florida found that there was male DNA on the wrapper, and it did not match Kevin's DNA. Now, the big question, of course, is whose DNA? So remember, the police had found that Nona did have some other male relationships, evidently, when they were investigating, and evidently she wasn't alone. Evidently, Kevin had also been having some sexual relationships outside of their relationship, within literally a couple weeks before Nona's death. But Nona's male friends were not asked for their DNA. They were not asked for it. The police had mentioned there were 6 to 7 other suspects, and none of them were asked. One of which was a convicted felon who lived in Nona's apartment building, but according to the police, allegedly had an alibi that they said that they looked in. So the defense team did try to get some of these, men's DNA via, garbage, how they do, like they tried to get some DNA, but it didn't work. They couldn't get the DNA from these 6 to 7 suspects. All they knew, for a fact, was that there was male DNA, and it wasn't Kevin. So Kevin's defense team was also working, obviously, on other items. And a big matter for them, just because of the whole situation, small town talk, was getting a change of venue for the trial. They felt like Pope County was extremely biased due to the community chatter, plus the newspaper in Russellville appeared to have bias against Kevin. And so they felt like Kevin would definitely not get a fair trial in Pope County. So moving venues in Arkansas is not a normal thing. The judge in charge did concede to it, so the new venue chosen is Ozark, Arkansas, which is the county seat for Franklin County. And also this was chosen because it was outside the circulation of the Russellville newspaper, The Courier. So Ozark is about 45 miles to the west of Russellville, to kind of give you guys some geography there. So change of venue decided. Now a couple of other questions were asked of the judge before the trial could start. So one was the prosecution wanted a witness called, and it was a girl that evidently Kevin had slept with a couple weeks before Nona died. So the prosecution wanted to call her to prove Kevin was a liar because he had said to the police that him and Nona were in an exclusive, serious relationship. The judge ruled with the defense and said that Kevin's sexual partners were not relevant to the case. So so this girl would not testify, woman. Also, in interviews with the police, evidently Kevin, when he was being interviewed, he had mentioned that he had smoked pot before. The defense wanted this not mentioned, and the judge also agreed to this because it wasn't relevant to the case. So, those two things decided, the trial does begin July 9th of 2007. I mean, we're talking 571 days after Nona's death. This always hits me. I understand all the bureaucracy. I mean, they had to change venues. They go back and forth. Motions are filed. I mean, obviously the defense is not in a hurry because they had to, they felt like they had to investigate the whole thing. Of course, it took several months to get the DNA, figured out on the condom wrapper. So it's just staggering. And I really feel for Nona's family. I mean, 571 days. It's a lot. That's a lot of days. So the trial begins in Ozark. The prosecution lays out their claim. Kevin dropped by Nona's apartment the morning of the 15th. He sees the condom wrapper on the counter. He flies into a jealous rage, and then he murders Nona and then stages the scene. He leaves and then, comes back with his mother and friend to contaminate the scene. Now he can, act, quote unquote, and get Nona's blood all over him, contaminate the scene. And, the prosecution's main evidence pointing to his being the murderer is his bloody palm print on the light bulb of the lamp. Now, the defense rebuttal to that was a very flawed investigation from the very beginning, tunnel vision by the police department, and that the real killer was still out there. And during the examination of Chief Bacon, Bacon admits that no one tested how long blood needed to dry on the said light bulb in those conditions in Nona's apartment. And again, this was, this whole thing is based on Bacon's notes themselves that the blood on the light bulb appeared to be tacky. Obviously, he didn't touch it, but he made that notation. The defense team actually conducts tests themselves and stated it takes, 45 minutes for the blood to completely dry in temperature of 60 degrees with the same humidity as what was Nona's apartment that night. So according to the defense, there was absolutely no way Kevin had touched the light bulb 6 to 7 hours before, like the prosecution was stating, and that clearly when he came in and grabbed Nona, he left the palm print on the bulb at that time. The EMTs had testified that the light bulb was just right there close to Nona's body. And there were crime scene photographs to attest to that as well. So a more telling situation for the defense team is there were prints found on the actual base of that same lamp. And the base of the lamp was said to have, prints on it that were from an unidentified, not matching Kevin. So there were prints on the base of that lamp, but they did not match Kevin. And the investigators did not do any type of cross-matching with people at the crime scene, or, I don't think that they didn't evidently have any prints from any of those other suspects, because they didn't do that. They were tunnel visioned. So the defense further notes that Detective Frost and the Russellville Police Department did not do the following items. 1, they didn't take handprints from the sliding glass door. 2, they did not collect evidence of the blood visible in photos of the Venetian blinds on the sliding glass door. So there was visible blood. They did not test that for DNA. They did not test, for prints, nothing. Number 3, no prints were taken or evidence collected to the bloody prints in photos around the light switch on the wall. Number 4, no prints taken in the kitchen where the condom was found. 5, no prints taken on the thermostat in the apartment, which had been turned down to 60 degrees, and there was kind of some smudging of blood at that thermostat. Number 6, there was no dusting of prints in the bathroom. However, the police removed the toilets trying to find the actual condom, thinking it had been flushed by the perpetrator or whatever, and no condom was ever found. So they did remove these toilets. They did some things, but they didn't dust for prints at all in the bathroom. Number 7, they failed to try to collect DNA off the lamp. Number 8, they did not test the condom wrapper for DNA. The defense had to. Number 9, they admitted to not collecting any other men's DNA. Number 10, no one checked Nona's cell phone for prints or DNA either, even though it had clearly been touched and the battery removed. Number 11, a month before Kevin was arrested, so this would have been February of 2006, Detective Frost returned Nona's cell phone to her stepfather, Dwayne Dybert, who evidently wanted the cell phone back for his own personal use because it was a better cell phone than the one he had, and he needed a new cell phone, and he didn't want to pay for a new cell phone. I mean, this is evidence going back to the family. So when Dwayne took the cell phone back, he deleted information off of the cell phone. He deleted out all of Nona's contacts. He erased info and overrode info in the phone. So, yes. So evidently, when the cell phone was first processed, the Arkansas Crime Lab could only, their technology allowed them to only see the incoming text and not the outgoing text. So now the defense couldn't, when they found out about this, they tried to, get the phone back and test it, but they couldn't test it. It had been erased. So Frost, who was very obviously new to homicide, and however had posed himself as such a great crime scene investigator, he had taken it upon himself to not ask the prosecutor or his chief before he gave the cell phone back to Dwayne in February. So there was so much more the defense could say on top of all of that. The officer that they had called in to perform the polygraph on Kevin the night of the visitation, he wasn't even certified to be able to do polygraph examinations. So not only, I have my own opinions on polygraphs, and they're not admissible in court. I do think police, kind of just use them as a tool to extract things. I think, it's just a tool in their little toolbox, but I have a lot of ill feelings on them, and basically, yeah, he wasn't even certified, not certified. You would think if you're going to, you have a homicide, you have someone that's a suspect, you would think you would at least get someone certified. I don't know. Detective Frost is leading this investigation. So, I don't know. On the prosecution side, they did try to poke holes in Kevin's alibi and all that he did on the day that Nona passed. And they did show the jury, all 3 hours of, one of his interrogations by the Russellville PD, which really ended up backfiring, did not help their case. All it showed to the jury was how young Kevin was, how confused he was, how he had no clue what was going on. He hardly came off as a calculated killer in these videos that the jury watched. So after 9 days of hearing testimony, the jury was left to start deciding. So they took an initial vote right off the bat to just kind of see where they all sat. So 6 felt that they were not guilty. The verdict was not guilty. 4 people were undecided, and 2 said guilty. And one of these people that did say guilty, they really felt like not guilty, but they went ahead and said guilty just so that they could ensure that they really dive deep into looking at the evidence. So, and because this was the foreman lady. So they then, go all the way to the beginning. They go back over all the evidence, all the crime scene, just every single thing that they could. They do recreate the crime scene of Kevin, and they're trying to see like trying to do a reenactment based on the crime scene photos on, was it feasible that his palm, touched the bulb? And they did very much, decide that yes, it was very feasible that he touched the light bulb when he went to Nona's body, like being there. It was just the proximity to it. It was just, obviously the blood was tacky. This print was tacky. So they felt like he had Nona touched the light bulb, transferred that blood there, left his print, and yeah, so they definitely could see that connection. So they're agreeing with the defense on how that went. And the jury was also extremely disturbed by the lack of evidence and the lack of investigating that happened. Like they were, they felt like it definitely, the defense proved that the police didn't do their jobs. So one juror didn't even again, we talked about how the prosecution showed the jury the 3 hours of interrogation, and that backfired. They didn't like how that interview went. So the jury deliberates. After 8 hours, they come back and they find Kevin is not guilty. Obviously, this was a moment of complete relief for Kevin and his family. On the flip side, this is a moment of shock for Nona's family. Dwayne, Nona's stepfather, literally calls out loudly in the courtroom, "Kevin, you got away with it." So this is how they're feeling. I will say, this Dwayne, he was very vocal. He did a lot of interviews. He was extremely, extremely vocal and out there with his opinions. And he made many comments, probably a lot of comments that didn't sit well with people. They kind of made, I don't know, I will say, listening to the comments, it was weird. The comments were weird. And just the fact that he wanted the cell phone back and then got the cell phone and then erased stuff from it. It was just odd. So he had made a comment to the press. If Kevin didn't want this publicity, he shouldn't have murdered someone so famous. As in Nona was well known and, the beauty queen and stuff like that. That was one of his comments. He also, when people asked him about, was the Dover newspaper more for, they were commenting on the Dover newspaper was more for Kevin, and then the Russellville newspaper was more for, against Kevin. And so he made the comment that the Dover's newspaper, I think it's called the Dover Times, it was just a rag that they used in Russellville as toilet paper. He made that comment. So he was very vocal. He made a lot of comments. And yeah, it was very interesting. So many people, after all of this, really scrutinized Dwayne, his actions, his choice of words. And like I said, it's weird. I think he was definitely someone of interest the police kind of looked at. Of course, they were pretty much, honed in on Kevin, but they did they did question Dwayne. They looked at his alibis for that day and all of that. So anyway, he just came off as really weird. So Kevin is exonerated, although again, in the town of public opinion, he's not so much, and according to Nona's family, they still feel very much like he's guilty, obviously, and they're devastated by these findings. They don't understand why the jury did this. So Kevin, even though he, may be off legally, he wants to know who did it. For multiple reasons, he wants to know who did it. For justice for Nona, of course, justice for himself. He's never going to be, exonerated in the public's eye unless they find out who actually committed the crime. So in a press conference after the trial, Kevin's defense team, they plead to the Polk County Sheriff's Department and the Arkansas State Police to take over the investigation and find out whose DNA was on that condom wrapper. So they're imploring for them to, to work the case, really work the case. The question is, will they work it? Will that happen? So I am leaving you here. This is the end of part one. We will explore what happens further in Nona's case after July 2007. So thank you guys so much for listening. Sorry about the coughing. I'm congested. So please email me with any comments, feelings, questions at unexplainedarkansas@gmail.com. And I love you guys, and stay tuned for part two. Okay. Bye.